What if I told you there is a man out here who built $100 million empire from scratch, lost every single dollar of it because the federal government said the whole operation was illegal, went to prison for 3 years, walked back out the door in January of 2026, and within 1 year was already rebuilding toward that same level again in a completely different industry. No shortcuts, no digital loopholes, a physical store inside one of the most competitive luxury markets on the planet. And before you say that sounds impossible, let me put some context on what we are actually talking about. We are not talking about someone who saved a little money before the government came. We are talking about someone who came home to a $45 million debt load, a Nike lawsuit, supervised release restrictions on his finances, and a name that every law enforcement agency in the country already knew. And he still walked out the door and said, "I am going to rebuild." What would you call that person? Would you call them reckless? Would you call them unstoppable? Or would you say that some people are just built different, that no matter how many times the system knocks them down, they are going to get back up and try again? Because here's the thing, the man I am talking about did not just lose money. He lost 57 cars, he lost over 4 dozen real estate properties. He lost a mansion that used to belong to a professional baseball player. He lost cash, jewelry, businesses, and his freedom. The United States government seized it all, auctioned off everything he spent years building, and sent him to federal prison on 62 criminal counts. And the whole time the money was flowing, he was filming it. He put every single dollar on YouTube for the world to see. The cars, the diamonds, the cash, the lifestyle, all of it. And that decision to film everything is part of what made him one of the most recognizable internet millionaires in history, and part of what helped build the case that eventually took him down. Yo, what is good, fam? And welcome back. Today we are going deep on one of the most unbelievable rise, fall, and comeback stories the internet has ever produced. We are talking about Bill Omar Carrasquillo, better known to the world as Omi in a Hellcat. And I want to be clear before we get into it. This is not just a story about someone who got caught doing something illegal and went to prison. That part is real, and we are going to cover all of it in detail. But the real story here, the reason this hits different from every other YouTube rise and fall you have seen, is what happened after. Because while most people who lose everything at that scale disappear, this man came home and immediately started rebuilding. We are going to talk about how, where, and whether it can actually work. But first, you need to understand where he came from and how he got to $100 million in the first place. Now, before we get into this wild ride, let me keep it real with y'all. There are a lot of people out here who still do not fully understand what Gears TV actually was, or how it made so much money so fast. And there are people who think Omi is just some guy who flex cars on YouTube. But behind that public persona was one of the most technically sophisticated and financially successful illegal streaming operations ever prosecuted in United States federal history. The shocking truth behind what built his empire and what brought it all crashing down is more layered than most coverage has ever explained. So we are about to lay out the whole thing, from North Philly to federal prison to the Diamond District, from beginning to present day. Bill Omar Carrasquillo was born on September 6, 1986 in North Philadelphia. If you know North Philly, you already know the environment he came up in did not offer many clean paths forward. His mother, Soledad, died of a drug overdose while he was still a child. His father, Julio, was a drug dealer who, by Omar's own account, given in open court and in multiple interviews, was teaching him to cook crack by the time he was 12 years old. He bounced between relatives, foster parents, and his father during the years his father was not incarcerated. At one point, a guardian reportedly had him committed to a mental health institution, not because he needed treatment, but because that guardian wanted access to the prescription narcotics that could then be sold on the streets. He was raised as one of 38 children across a deeply complicated household situation. He became a dealer as a teenager and stayed in that life into his late 20s. By any honest measure, the cards he was dealt at birth were stacked against him from day one. But here is where it gets real. Even while he was in the streets, Omar had something the streets could not teach and could not take away. He had an entrepreneurial brain. He thought about systems. He thought about scale. He thought about customers. When he eventually started pulling himself out of the game, he did not quietly disappear and try to live a normal life. He turned the camera on himself and started documenting everything on YouTube. The channel was called Omi in a Hellcat, named after his love for the Dodge Hellcat muscle car. Early content was raw and personal. He talked about where he came from, what he had been through, and where he was trying to go. People connected immediately because he was not performing a character. He was just himself, loud and unfiltered and unapologetic, talking directly into a camera about money and ambition and what it felt like to come from nothing and want everything. The channel eventually climbed past 800,000 subscribers and accumulated over 65 million views. But what really made the audience stay was the business story he was building in real time. Because by 2016, Omar had found something that was making him more money than most people see in a lifetime. Now let me break down for y'all exactly how Gears TV worked, because you need to understand the mechanics to understand why this case became one of the largest in Department of Justice history. The business was built around something called IPTV, which stands for Internet Protocol Television. The concept is simple. Instead of receiving television through a traditional cable box or satellite dish, a customer gets it delivered over the internet. Legitimate streaming services like Netflix do a version of this with content they have licensed. What Gears TV did was entirely different, and federal prosecutors argued it was entirely criminal. Here is what they actually did according to the indictment and subsequent court proceedings. Carrasquillo and his partners opened dozens of subscriber accounts with major cable providers including Comcast, Verizon Fios, and DirecTV. They paid for those subscriptions legally at the consumer level. But then, prosecutors alleged they hacked and decrypted the encrypted signals transmitting through those cable boxes, capturing the live feeds of hundreds of channels, premium sports packages, pay-per-view boxing, and UFC events, on-demand movies from major studios, television shows produced by networks and streaming giants who had spent billions creating that content. All of that captured programming was then retransmitted through Gears TV's own servers and resold to customers at a fraction of legitimate pricing, as low as $15 per month for access to over 1,000 channels. Customers received preloaded Amazon Fire Stick devices that arrived configured and ready to use. You plugged it in and you had access to virtually everything on cable, plus major pay-per-view events for a fraction of what Comcast or DirecTV would charge you. The setup was designed to be completely frictionless, and that frictionlessness is exactly why the subscriber base exploded the way it did. The numbers that came out in court are staggering. At its peak, Gears TV had more than 100,000 paying subscribers. Between March 2016 and November 2019, the operation generated more than $34 million in revenue. That is over $34 million in roughly 3 years from a business that cost almost nothing to scale because the marginal cost of adding each new subscriber to a server-based platform is essentially zero. The senior attorney from the Justice Department's Computer Crime and Intellectual Property section said at sentencing that Carrasquillo had made more money from his illegal operation than virtually every other copyright defendant he had ever prosecuted in his career. Let that sink in for a minute. Out of every copyright infringement case the federal government has ever brought, this man from North Philadelphia who was dealing not long before any of this started was at the top of the financial damage list. The entire illegal IPTV industry in the United States was generating an estimated $1 billion per year, according to studies cited in the case. Carrasquillo was not a small player in that ecosystem. He was operating at the very top of it, and he was doing it completely out in the open on the internet. But yo, this is where the story gets deeper than just running a piracy service. See, Omi did not just build the business, he broadcasted it. While federal investigators were eventually building a case against him, he was posting YouTube titles like, "Omi in a Hellcat makes over $1,100,000 in 1 week," and openly promoting his streaming service to hundreds of thousands of followers. His Instagram showed his son holding stacks of cash. He filmed himself at car dealerships constantly. He was not hiding anything. He was performing, and the performance was extraordinary. By the peak of his operation, Carrasquillo's lifestyle was one of the most visually documented examples of fast money in YouTube history. He accumulated 57 vehicles, a number confirmed in court documents. That collection included 4 Lamborghinis, among them a custom Power Rangers themed build that became one of the most talked about cars in the entire catalog. There were Porsches, Bentleys, McLarens, and rare custom builds that most car enthusiasts never see in person. There were the Dodge Hellcats that gave him his name. Court documents noted the collection included a Lamborghini Huracan Evo, a 1996 Chevrolet Impala, a custom Ford Mustang, multiple Rolls Royces, and a range of Porsches and Bentleys covering nearly every price point in the exotic car market. When federal agents arrived in November 2019, one witness estimated they took approximately 30 vehicles in the initial seizure alone and called the driveway a dealership being cleared out. Beyond the cars, he was quietly and then loudly building a real estate empire. He purchased more than 4 dozen properties across Philadelphia and its suburbs, buying many of them in cash at weekly real estate auctions, where cash buyers had enormous leverage. He acquired bars and nightclubs. He moved into commercial real estate. His primary residence was a spacious mansion in Swedesboro, New Jersey, previously owned by Jimmy Rollins, the longtime Philadelphia Phillies shortstop and 6-time Gold Glove winner. He wore custom diamond-encrusted jewelry worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, pieces built specifically for him. His co-defendant Barone's later sentencing memorandum described Carrasquillo during this period as becoming so flush with cash that he was buying up properties at weekly auctions and expanding into nightlife at a pace that reflected just how much money was actually flowing through the operation. Now this is where we got to address the collapse, because everything changed on the morning of November 27, 2019. FBI and IRS agents executed search warrants on the Swedesboro mansion. In a moment that felt almost scripted for a man who built his entire brand around documenting his life, part of the raid was live streamed to the internet. Carrasquillo was photographed shirtless and in boxer shorts as federal agents handcuffed him in his foyer. The images spread immediately. Accounts were frozen. The cars began moving onto flatbed trucks. $35 million in assets started disappearing from his life in a matter of hours. He made a video right after titled, "The FBI seized everything from me." He was defiant. He said he was only guilty of making money. He compared what he did to having friends without cable over to your house and collecting money to cover a pay-per-view event. His lawyer Dante Mills compared him publicly to tech innovators like Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs, people who moved before regulations caught up to what they were doing. The real kicker, though, is what happened when the formal charges came. September 2021. A 62-count indictment named Carrasquillo and 2 business partners, Jesse Gonzalez of California and Michael Barone of New York. Charges included conspiracy to commit copyright violations, wire fraud, money laundering, access device fraud, and tax evasion. The case involved 120 terabytes of electronic data and discovery alone. Barone's sentencing memorandum alleged that when he tried to leave the operation, he was threatened by gunmen on 2 separate occasions. Carrasquillo was facing a theoretical maximum exposure of 514 years in federal prison across all 62 counts. He initially maintained his innocence, but in early 2022, he entered a guilty plea. He recorded a YouTube video titled, "OMI in a Hellcat is guilty." And fam, the tone was completely different from anything he had ever posted before. He said ignorance is no excuse. He talked about narcissistic behavior and always playing the victim. He described the moment his perspective shifted. He had been watching a Disney documentary about the making of Pixar animated films, watching how thousands of workers contributed to creating even a half hour of content, how many livelihoods depended on that work. And sitting there watching it, he realized what he had been doing was not victimless. He had been stealing from those people. That is some real accountability right there. Sentencing came in March 2023. Judge Harvey Bartle III presided. The Justice Department attorney noted that Carrasquillo had made more money from his illegal operation than virtually every other copyright defendant he had ever seen, and that this deserved significant punishment. Carrasquillo apologized to his family, his employees, and the companies he had stolen from. The sentence was 66 months, 5.5 years. The court ordered forfeiture of more than $30 million in personal profits, nearly $11 million in restitution to the cable companies, $5.7 million to the IRS for years of unfiled tax returns. Total financial obligations exceeding $45 million when everything was combined. For reference, he had filed no personal or corporate tax returns for any of the income generated during the entire life of the operation. The only legitimate income the government could trace from Carrasquillo before Gears TV was approximately $550 per year in YouTube advertising royalties. Everything else was built on the streaming operation and its tens of millions in revenue. and now every dollar of it was being reclaimed. And then everything he had built went to auction. Every Lamborghini that had its own YouTube video got a government lot number. Every piece of custom jewelry went into a federal inventory. The Swedesboro mansion that had been toured on camera dozens of times went to sale. There is something uniquely devastating about watching a federal asset auction when the person whose possessions are being sold built their entire public identity around owning those things. Strangers bid on the cars while he sat in federal custody waiting for a sentence to begin. That is the kind of loss that is not just financial, it is personal and public at the same time. Prison changed him in ways that numbers cannot capture. He served approximately 33 months of the 66-month sentence, earning release around January 6, 2026, through good conduct credits under federal guidelines including provisions from the First Step Act and time already served before formal sentencing. When he walked out, a clip spread across social media immediately. Friends swarmed him. Someone put a gold chain pendant around his neck the moment he stepped out, a deliberate callback to who he had always been. Thousands of reactions and the phrase, "Free Omi," lit up the internet. But in his subsequent interview with Vlad TV, the man who walked out described prison in terms nothing like the bravado his public persona ever suggested. He called it a cemetery for the living, a place where time feels frozen and the outside world moves on without you. He talked about witnessing suicides within the facility. He talked about struggling with depression and adapting to a life stripped of every status symbol he had spent years accumulating. He talked about being angry at God. He lost over 110 pounds while incarcerated. He got engaged inside. He came out physically and emotionally transformed in ways that 3 years of watching from the outside could not fully capture. Now let us talk about what he came home to and what he is building now, because this is the chapter that nobody expected. He came home under supervised release, meaning the government is watching his finances and his activities closely for years. He publicly stated his next chapter had to be built on something legitimate, something tangible, something that could not be taken from him the same way. He announced ventures in content creation, fashion, sneakers, and entrepreneurship. While still incarcerated, he launched a sneaker silhouette under the Reloaded brand and sold it out through limited means from inside a federal facility, which told his audience everything they needed to know about whether his hustle has survived prison. He also launched what he is calling a platform called Reloaded that signals a broader multimedia and business presence. But the move that captured the most attention, the one that symbolically represents the most dramatic pivot of his entire story, was stepping into the New York City jewelry world. Fine jewelry, luxury watches, physical product, real inventory, and actual store presence in one of the most trusted and competitive commercial ecosystems in the world. For y'all who might not fully understand what the Diamond District represents, let me explain. It is a single block of West 47th Street in Midtown Manhattan, running between 5th Avenue and 6th Avenue, one block from Rockefeller Center. Within that one block are more than 2,600 independent businesses, from retail jewelers to wholesale diamond dealers to luxury watch specialists. Estimates place the daily value of diamonds, precious metals, and jewelry transacted on that block at somewhere between $400 and $500 million. Not annually, every single day. The block processes approximately 90% of all diamonds entering the United States. Multi-generational family businesses that anchor the district were largely established by European jewelers who fled Nazi persecution during World War II. Many of them previously based in Amsterdam and Antwerp, and they built a network of trust and expertise that has compounded for 80 years. Trust in that world is not built through social media. It is built through decades of consistent relationships, sourced through introductions, and verified through reputation that passes through networks quietly. Now, this ain't just about where he set up shop. This is about what that choice actually means strategically compared to the empire he lost. The streaming business scaled almost instantly. The moment the service worked, revenue exploded because adding another subscriber to a digital platform costs essentially nothing. 100,000 subscribers is just a number in a database. The entire operation ran on software, bandwidth, and a small team, fast to build, massive cash flow, almost no physical overhead. The jewelry business operates on completely different principles. Inventory is physical and expensive. A single high-end timepiece can represent tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in tied-up capital. Sourcing diamonds and luxury watches at competitive wholesale prices requires relationships with suppliers who have to trust you before they extend favorable terms. Client acquisition in the luxury space is a slow process built on personal referrals and earned credibility. A customer spending $50,000 on a watch is not choosing their dealer from an advertisement. They are choosing someone who came recommended through a relationship chain that took years to build. The real kicker, though, is this. The jewelry business cannot scale from 0 to 100,000 customers in 6 months, the way an IPTV platform can. But it also cannot be shut down with a federal raid and a 62-count indictment. Because the product is physical, the transactions are documented, the inventory is legal, and the business is legitimate. The risk profile is completely different. The ceiling is lower short-term. The floor is dramatically higher long-term. That comparison is the core business lesson inside this entire story. The first empire scaled faster than almost any business in YouTube history. A former drug dealer from North Philadelphia with no formal business education built a $34 million operation in 3 years through technology, hustle, and an intuitive read on what customers wanted. That is genuinely impressive. But the empire had a fatal flaw that was always there. Even when the money was flowing and the cameras were rolling, the foundation was illegal. An empire built on an illegal foundation has no protection when the government decides to apply the law. Every dollar that came in was exposed. Every asset purchased with those dollars was exposed. Every car and property and bank account was technically already owned by the federal government the moment it was acquired, with illegal proceeds. He just did not know it yet. Now let us talk about the public reaction, because it ain't one-dimensional, and pretending it is would be doing y'all a disservice. Among his core audience, the response to his release was overwhelmingly celebratory. Fans who followed him since the Gears TV days treated January 6, 2026 like the return of a folk hero. The Fire Stick King was home. His subscriber base, which remained mostly intact through years of federal proceedings, was waiting for him. Among critics and business observers, the reaction was more complicated. Some pointed out that his empire was fundamentally built on theft, that the content creators, production workers, and cable companies whose signals were captured and resold suffered real financial harm. Others pointed to a default judgment issued by a New York court in April 2024, ordering him to pay $8 million to Nike for trademark infringement related to sneaker designs his company allegedly copied from the Air Jordan 1 and Nike Dunk silhouettes. The legal obligations attached to his name when he walked out in January 2026 were enormous. The federal restitution, the IRS bill, the Nike judgment, and ongoing supervised release obligations paint a picture of a man who is simultaneously free and financially constrained in ways that will take years to fully resolve. But here's where it gets interesting, because there is a third reaction that sits between the celebration and the criticism, and might be the most honest of all. It is the reaction of watching someone who came from nothing, who learned to survive in one of the hardest environments in America, who built something extraordinary through genuine intelligence and deeply illegal methods, who lost all of it, who spent over 3 years in federal prison, and who walked back out the door and immediately started building again. That is a human response to pressure that most people will never understand, because most people have never faced anything remotely like it. You do not have to celebrate every decision he made to recognize that what he is attempting right now takes a level of resilience that is genuinely rare. At the end of the day, the Omi in a Hellcat story is not just about IPTV piracy or federal prison or luxury cars. It is about what happens when someone with real intelligence and real drive builds in the wrong direction and then has to figure out who they are when the empire is gone. It is about whether losing everything actually changes a person at their core, or whether it just gives them better information the second time around. Because those are two very different outcomes with two very different futures attached to them. A person who is genuinely changed by losing everything builds the second time with completely different values. A person who only learned to build differently is the same person with better risk management. Which version of Bill Omar Carrasquillo walked out of federal prison in January 2026 is the question that the next few years are going to answer. And fam, that answer matters not just for him, but for every person watching this who has ever lost something they spent years building and had to decide whether to start over. The real question now, fam, is whether Bill Omar Carrasquillo can do something in the Diamond District and in legitimate business that is actually harder than anything he has done before. Not just build fast, build clean, build something that belongs to him entirely, that no government seizure can touch, that no federal raid can dismantle overnight, that does not require him to outrun the law in order to keep it. The man came up from North Philadelphia with nothing. The streets taught him to survive. A cable piracy empire made him one of the most famous internet millionaires in the world, and then took everything away. A federal prison gave him 33 months to decide who he actually is when nobody is filming. And the New York City Diamond District, one block of 47th Street where hundreds of millions in diamonds change hands every single day, might be the place where the story finally gets its real ending. Whether it works depends entirely on whether he can be the kind of businessman the first empire never actually needed him to be. Patient, transparent, accountable. Building something that does not require him to outrun the law to keep it. The cameras are back on. The 800,000 subscribers are watching and waiting. The question is not whether Omi and a Hellcat can build again. He has proven twice over and in two completely different worlds that he absolutely can. The real question is whether what he builds this time can actually last. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Let me know whether you think the comeback is real or whether his history is going to repeat itself all over again. And make sure you click on the video on screen for more stories exactly like this one.